During the early 1980s until the early 1990s, the first new wave, or new cinema, began to arise. It was kick-started more or less when 2 omnibus films were made to combat the then popular Hong Kong imports and the negative effects home video distribution was having on the local film economy. The 2 films were The Sandwich Man and In Our Time. They were produced to give several new Taiwanese filmmakers a chance to nurture a more local-focused identity into its national cinema. Before this, films made in Taiwan existed primarily to accommodate the mainland Chinese audiences, meaning issues and language dialects relevant to the Taiwanese people were commonly overlooked. The filmmakers who took part in these 2 anthology films would later make films relevant to both rural and urban Taiwanese issues, often using heavily naturalistic and minimalist aesthetics to depict the everyday lives of the local people. Culture academic Douglas Kellner referred to the movement as combining social realism with modernist aesthetics, so it's no surprise the films from this era are often compared to the likes of Yasujiro Ozu and Shimizu Hiroshi. Actually, Kellner's essay, New Taiwan Cinema in the 80s, is a great resource if you want a better insight into this era. We've attached a link to it in the description. But anyway, let's get to our list. Number 5, Kue Mei, A Woman. This is a delicately told story about a young woman who marries an older widow and how she has to immediately inherit the role of mother to his offspring. The narrative is delivered episodically throughout her life, from her younger years and during the various difficulties of raising her family, in particular the hostilities from her stepdaughter, to her middle age where she is desperately trying to keep the family business afloat while simultaneously dealing with the ever-increasing domestic tensions. Then finally her later years, in the almost unrecognisable modern Taiwan, where she is suffering from illness and the family she fought to provide for over the years finally have to care for her. The film's director, Yi Chang, had a great knack for producing commercially appealing melodramas while still maintaining the patient and restrained tone that made the new cinema films iconic. Unfortunately, despite producing some pretty impressive films, Yi Chang seems to have fallen off the radar regarding filmmaking, focusing more nowadays on his successful glass sculpting career. The film pretty much proves wrong the old critics' fallacy that episodic films are somehow low quality by default, and depicts the dramatic cultural and almost ecological changes Taiwan went through post-Japanese occupation. It's also one of the few, if not best, films from the first wave that reveals Taiwan's rapid cultural and environmental changes solely from the perspective of a woman. Number 4, Growing Up. Like many of the early new cinema films, this one is a nostalgic piece about the Taiwanese countryside, where the narrative is a projection of adolescent memory. Along with The Sandwich Man and In Our Time, Growing Up is one of the films many feel contributed to the launch of the new cinema, especially regarding its unsentimental take on themes like childhood and its naturalistic portrait of Taiwan's rural identities. Despite the film being so important to the origins of the movement, its director, Chen Kun-ho, is actually more known as a cinematographer, more specifically for his work with new cinema heavyweight Hao Xiaoshen. In fact, the screenplay was the first collaboration between Hao and Chu Tianwen, a partnership that would go on to produce some of Ho's most memorable films. Growing Up is told from the perspective of a character that is external to the protagonist. This really represents a characteristic key to most of the new cinema films, which is its observational and often impartial-like portrait of characters and their worlds. Also, like Kue Mei, the film is told through a coming-of-age episodic narrative. I've actually always thought Growing Up and Kue Mei would make a great double feature, hint hint festival programmers. Number 3, Straw Man. After an unexploded bomb lands on two brothers' farms during the final years of the Japanese occupation, the various families attempt to figure out what to do with it. This involves a misguided effort at lugging it to the local Japanese authorities as a gift to the emperor, to eventually throwing it into the ocean at the demand of the frightened officials. The story aside though, this film is really about the incredibly charming characters that make up the rural family, and the harsh conditions they were expected to survive in during this period. The director, Wang Tung, was the veteran of the new cinema directors, working in the Taiwanese film industry since the health realism era. His previous film, A Flower in the Rainy Night, was actually his most significant film, and was one of the first success stories of the new cinema era, beating In Our Time both commercially and in the international film circuit. Despite not being as successful, we still feel Straw Man is the more relevant film to add to the list, as it was the first instalment of his nativist trilogy. These were 3 films that Wang Tung made throughout the First Wave era that aimed to focus on the countryside backdrop and the struggles the rural communities had to endure over the years. Like Growing Up, it's told from an external perspective, the scarecrow in this case. Almost like the film is from the perspective of the landscape, treating place like a character in itself. This emphasises how important Taiwan and the countryside was during this era of cinema. To such an extent, it was given an equal platform with the characters and their stories. Number 2, Taipei Story. The film is about a career-driven woman and the monotonous relationship she has with her husband, a baseball fanatic who doesn't share her ambitious desires and appears to be aimlessly stuck in the past, lingering on his failed attempt to migrate to the US. They move to a new Taipei apartment, which should be the beginning of their journey up in the world. However, she loses her job not long after their move, which not only holds back her career plans, but results in their marriage being exposed further for its obvious lack of passion. She eventually falls into a brief encounter-like affiliation with an architect from her old company, and in a typically reserved Edward Yang manner, suggestions of a possible affair are played with. Edward Yang is arguably the most important director of the movement, and he's commonly known as the ringleader. He used to hold meetings in his house with the other participants of the first wave to watch and discuss films. These meetings would prove to be an important component concerning the filmmaker's strong camaraderie and collective vision of Taiwanese cinema throughout the 1980s. Yang unfortunately died very young from a brain tumour, but his contribution to East Asian cinema was unprecedented. His intellect and legendary film knowledge shaped a unique form of authorship that propelled the new cinema to the influential status it is today. Unlike most of the other first wave films, Taipei Story focuses more on the isolation of urban life in Taiwan and the middle class struggle with alienation and identity, something that the second wave filmmakers like Chai Ming Liang and Yu Wei Yen would focus more on in the 90s. This is probably because, unlike his peers, Yang came from a middle class family, so the cosmopolitan city with its privileged inhabitants is most likely where he could channel his authorship more authentically and more critically. The film also has an admirably downplayed performance by Hao Xiaoshen as the husband, who also co-wrote the screenplay. His character's fixation with the US is actually a telling insight into the existential implications Taiwan's rapid westernization had on its people. Number 1, The Time to Live, The Time to Die. As with most films by Hao Xiaoshen and the majority of films from this era, the story is deceptively simple, centering on a young boy growing up during the 1940s to 1960s, a time where his family were enduring a period of turbulence regarding their cultural identity. Like a lot of families from the north and south of the mainland at the time, they moved to Taiwan to flee the Civil War. This caused an elaborate contrast between the young and old generations. The Time to Live, The Time to Die delicately illustrates how the elder family members struggle to adapt in their new country, whilst the younger ones, like the boy, flourish. The older the boy gets, the more he distances himself from his family and their fading heritage. There's so much to be said about its director Hao Xiaoshen, so much so in fact, we dedicated a whole video introduction to him, which we recommend you watch also. To sum up Hao's importance in a nutshell, he and Edward Yang are really the superstars of the new cinema, and apart from Ang Lee and King Hu, the most acclaimed filmmakers from Taiwan. He's also known for his 3 trilogies that depict various characteristics of Taiwanese culture and history, starting with the rural coming-of-age trilogy, which were nostalgic and personal portraits of characters living amongst Taiwan's rural post-war communities. Then, the Taiwanese history trilogy, that depicted, as the title says, key characters during significant political and historical eras of Taiwan. Finally, there was the female urban youth trilogy, the more unofficial one that threaded through the previous trilogies, and moves away from the rural nostalgia that the new cinema was known for, and focuses on Taiwan's contemporary urban isolation, specifically from the perspective of young women. The Time to Live, the Time to Die was actually the second instalment of Howe's rural coming-of-age trilogy, and really sums up the new cinema's importance regarding the depiction of Taiwan's unique cultural identity, using rural locations, local non-professional actors, and the Hakka dialect, distancing itself from the Mandarin productions Taiwan commonly produced to appeal to the general Chinese market. Unlike the other two films from this trilogy that were based on the childhood of Howe's writers, Chu Qian-wen and Wu Nianjian, The Time to Live, the Time to Die was Howe's personal film story, based on his own adolescence, which is probably why in retrospect, this film made such an impact on how we all remember the Taiwanese new cinema movement, and its influence on filmmakers from all over the world. It's just so personal, and because of this, it makes the film much more profound and powerful than the other two films, at least in my opinion. As an honourable mention, we should really bring up Wan Ren, who was the more politically charged filmmaker associated with the movement. He's not usually branded an auteur like the others, but his short in the Sandwich Man omnibus, Taste of Apples, is essential, especially if you want an understanding of one side of the political mindset during the movement, though it's an extreme one, at least compared to the other more subtle filmmakers of this era. Hopefully this video has been useful to some of you. We're going to try and do a second wave video soon, which will hopefully give a more comprehensive insight into the Taiwanese new cinema as a whole. But anyway, thanks for watching.